There's one other, I think, really important application of blood biomarkers in
Oh,
poultry.
good.
Um,
Hmm.
I think of coccidiosis, especially from
Yes.
from a vet perspective. Coccidiosis, it's really common. We're looking at how do the blood biomarkers move in response to coccidiosis infection,
Right.
which is what a
Right.
lot of people deal with. So we actually did a trial, and there are some already research on this topic.
Hmm.
Uh, but we look at the plasma carotenoids. That's one of the biomarkers that we look at. And
Right.
I'm sure you know carotenoids, it maintains an effective intestinal barrier
Hmm.
function and can reduce bacterial and toxin
Right.
translocation. It's a good indicator for that physical integrity of the gut. Uh, so there was a Cocci trial done, and we saw a significant drop in carotenoids as early as 8 days prior to clinical signs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Poultry Podcast. My name is Jason Emmert, and today we're visiting with Dr. Montana Oubre, who is a DVM and Technical Services Manager at DSM. Dr. Oubre has a bachelor's degree in environmental biology from Nicholls State University and a DVM from Louisiana State University. Montana, welcome to the Poultry Podcast.
And thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
We are so excited to have our conversation. There's lots of great things we can talk about, but we always like to get started hearing a little bit about folks' academic journey and anything you want to share, even the why poultry, that kind of stuff is always of interest to us and our listeners.
Yeah. So I start back in elementary school with my love of just chickens. I'll never
Yeah.
forget, I was in elementary school around third, fourth grade and came across this eBay ad. We had just got a computer and internet, and I saw on eBay a dozen of fertile eggs listed for sale. They were silky chickens, the most beautiful bird I can imagine. It was about $60 for a dozen of fertile eggs. Had no idea how to hatch eggs or anything about chickens. I convinced my parents to let me buy them because they initially said, no way, too expensive. Saved my birthday money. I ended up borrowing an incubator from someone, Googled on backyardchickens.com how to hatch and incubate them. I get those dozen of eggs. I hatched out a handful. By middle school, seventh, eighth grade, I had almost 300, a couple hundred at that point. So
Wow.
an obsession. I loved breeding for FFA, 4-H. I did a lot of showing, exhibition birds. So
Yeah.
loved creating breeding programs, figuring out what's the best feed. I just loved anything and everything poultry. So I did that. I showed pigs as well. We had horses. I remember in middle school when I had so many, and being from South Louisiana, a majority of them got fowl pox. Uh,
Oh, sure.
and I had no idea what this was. My parents had no clue. I remember looking up, diagnosing it, and went to Tractor Supply and bought the vaccine for it. And from then on, vaccinated every single chick that I hatched. And
Hmm.
that problem entirely went away. And that was like an aha moment for me. It clicked. I
Sure.
was like, this works. I want to learn more about this instead of that old school, just they're just chickens. But no, there are things you can do, vaccines you can put in place to protect them, and that was an aha moment. And I decided I wanted to go to vet school. Did whatever I could to get into vet school from very early on. Um, and I wanted to have a backup plan, so I majored in environmental biology, got into vet school. Lucky enough at LSU, I thought poultry would be part of what I would get to practice if I was lucky. I'd get to see some chickens because you don't hear in South Louisiana. There's not much of a commercial poultry industry, so
Right.
I didn't really have that representation. Had no idea this industry existed. I was hoping in vet school I'd learn some chicken things and hopefully make that work somehow. But mixed animal was the goal then. Um,
Mhm.
this was 2 years before I graduated vet school. I happened upon Triple AP, and there was a presentation given on just careers in poultry, and poultry veterinarian was one of those career paths, and
Sure.
mind blown. I have nothing's ever clicked that hard for me. And at that moment, I decided this is what I have been wanting to do since I was a kid and just didn't know existed. So then on, I changed my concentration in vet school for my clinical year and a half and did as many poultry externships as I possibly could to get as much experience as possible. Yeah, and that's how I ended up. I graduated in 2022 from vet school and started with DSM as an intern and now a technical service manager. So yeah, just being here, happy just to be involved in the poultry industry. I love chicken so much, so that's kind of my incentive, my motivation. That's what drives me really when it comes to my career in poultry.
DSM strives to bring our customers efficient, sustainable poultry solutions, from essential vitamins like HYD to next-generation products like Hyphorius for efficient phosphorus utilization and Biofix to counteract naturally occurring metabolites in feed. Our portfolio is growing as we continue to bring innovation to the poultry industry. Visit dsm.com/ANH to learn more about our newest solutions.
That's fantastic. And it was hard for me to even sit still as you were telling that story, because that's, as educators, for those of us that work in universities and for people in industry who work with interns and young people, I mean, that's what we live for, to see somebody get that aha moment. I mean, there's just nothing better than that. And I think all of us have, some version of that, but that's fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. So, another thing, I think this is a great testament to, if anybody who's listening that ever does workshops with students or with young people and you wonder, does this make a difference? I mean, it does, right? For AAAP, hey, that brought somebody into the fold, into the discipline.
Yeah.
And so it's worth doing those things.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance for the outreach. I had 4-H was my outlet in elementary, middle school, high school. And luckily I happened upon AAAP, but I know the importance of having those outreach programs, and it really does. It touches people, so that's part of also what I love talking to young students in vet school who want a career in poultry and don't know quite how to navigate it. It's a big industry, but it's still quite small in the circle. So navigating that has its own challenges if you're not familiar, but you can get there. If you have a passion for it, it'll happen.
Yeah. I love the aspect of your story as well that involves you having, as a young person, like an actual medical experience with animals, where you diagnosed something, you figured out how to address that. And what a difference, and how refreshing compared to just what we often hear of, I want to be a vet because I love animals. Mm-hmm. Well, you had that experience and loved animals, clearly, but it was much more real than that, where you encountered a problem and had to figure out how to solve it.
Yeah, exactly. And I do love the idea of having that indirect impact on public health, on human health, right?
Sure.
In vet school, I have some amazing colleagues who practice great small animal and large animal medicine. There's so many good practitioners in that field, and I think there's a need in poultry too. From that population epidemiology aspect. So that's another part that I really love, that broad impact, right, of that population medicine. And that just is like the icing on the cake, the cherry on top of what I get to do, right?
Right. I think that's one of the most interesting, I guess you could call it a contrast of veterinary medicine with poultry versus working with a lot of other kinds of animals, the flock, the population versus the individual. Not that, poultry veterinarians don't care about the individual, but, there's oftentimes many, many individuals and in situations where things can spread easily and quickly. And so, maybe talk about that a little bit, the differences as you see it in veterinary medicine with poultry, and maybe what some of the opportunities are there versus other potential career paths that you could have taken.
Yeah. So, and I considered, doing that mixed animal which is, small and large, dogs, cats,
Mhm.
horses, and a little bit in
Yeah.
agriculture. But it's a completely different mentality when you're looking at companion animal, right? And that's what I like to refer to it as companion. It's
Yeah.
very different when you have a client who's willing to go, you know, all out for one specific animal because of what it means to
Yes.
them,
Yep.
versus when you have to be a little more, I guess, realistic and a little more, have
Mhm.
a different mindset when you're thinking about these huge populations of birds, right?
Right.
It's a different mentality, and with those,
Mhm.
it's two completely different career paths there, different
Yep.
resources, and it's different medicine, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I definitely considered doing small animal, but like I said, I love the idea of that broader impact. It impacts so much more than just me or one specific animal. You know,
Yes.
um, there's that saying, you sacrifice one for many instead of just focusing on that one particular animal. So I think that
Right.
really entices me.
Right. And the degree to which that really impacts people, I mean, consumers, we have only to look at recent egg prices in the not too distant past, and
Yeah,
even, potentially facing, hopefully not, but potentially facing similar issues moving forward. We can see how, I mean, animal health has an impact on people in every part of our society. It doesn't matter if they're on the farm or in a rural community or in the middle of a city.
exactly. Yeah, especially when it comes to underprivileged people who you need
Yeah.
a clean protein source that's
Yes.
efficient, and there's sustainability comes ties into this, and
Yep.
yeah, I think that's such an interesting dynamic, and there is so
Mhm.
much room for improvement there. We're not done. There's so much
Right.
research and resources in poultry and agriculture, and it's nice to be part of that and be part of that conversation.
It is. It is. One thing too, and I, kind of from the outside, at least of the veterinary profession, but looking at some of the poultry veterinarians I've known in the past, it looks like oftentimes you have some really interesting opportunities to engage in the business side, and even to pursue some other career paths within the industry, that just opens, I think, a lot more doors than what many veterinarians in a small practice, small animal practice, or mixed animal practice might have.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many opportunities. It's almost overwhelming in poultry,
Sure.
initially finding your place, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
funny. I talked to some colleagues in small animal or in companion medicine, and yeah, it's very different, the opportunities in poultry. It's a different
Hmm.
industry entirely, and it can
Yeah.
take you to so many different places. And
Hmm.
it's interesting because they think, oh, poultry is poultry, chicken is chicken, but even
Hmm.
within that, I mean, it's such a diverse field, and yeah,
Yes.
finding my place is a little more challenging uh,
Hmm.
than this already preconceived idea of what you do. It's different for every poultry vet, and for every
Yeah.
company, and for every breed and chicken and location, and there's so many variables.
Right. And I think for all of us, we have to look at the potential career paths that we might take and understand what we're suited for. Every job has its stresses, and I'm suited to handle these kinds of stresses, but not those kinds. And I know with a lot of our students that go into veterinary medicine that maybe are in their own mixed practice, working in clinics with companion animals, especially. There's some new kinds of stresses that I think people didn't used to have to face, and a lot of it has to do with social media. I
Yes,
mean, being attacked on social media because you're not able to save somebody's pet. This is something that didn't happen years ago, but yeah, it's a challenge trying to think about how to prepare students for that.
yeah,
So traditionally, I think we would say, well, the business, you're in the industry, there's stress that goes along with that. You need to be successful. Um, but it's not as if other veterinary career paths don't have stress. So I
yeah,
think people
exactly.
just need to think about what they're best suited for.
Yeah, exactly. You get to really, I guess, reflect on what kind of lifestyle you want to live. Right. I think that's
Yes.
a big part of
Yep.
it. And it, I know a lot of people who went through vet school, and they're even
Hmm.
doing something entirely different than what they originally
Right.
anticipated. Right.
Right.
A lot of schooling is like that. And I feel like
Yeah.
you really have to look, within and think, what do I want out of my career and lifestyle, and
Yeah.
you have to align with that instead of forcing yourself into something you're maybe not quite as suited for, and then end up
Hmm.
burning out. Uh, a companion animal, especially with you mentioned that like a mental health toll. Now
Oh, boy.
that's another big thing dealing with clients, dealing with owners of specific animals. It's different than on a farm level. So it's
Yeah.
like you said, different type of challenge there.
Yep, it is.
And yeah, my lifestyle, I travel pretty often. Sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a month. So it's a
Wow.
even that's a different lifestyle. I look at it as an opportunity to experience and explore really the world.
Yeah.
And it's again very different than having a typical like 9 to 5 job at one clinic
Sure.
that you go to every day. It's
Yep.
every week for me is completely different, and I have to be dynamic and flexible.
Yeah. That's an exciting part, I think, that
Yeah, it keeps it
probably
interesting.
in the midst of the challenges of vet school and the rigor, people, I would guess, may not think about those things as much.
No,
But yeah, there's a lot of excitement that could go along with that.
yeah, never would I have pictured that I could work from home and live
Right.
really anywhere. I remember
Right.
graduating and just the idea of picking any location I want to live, and I just have to travel to do phone calls, and it's
Wow.
yeah, I pinch myself that I get to live this kind of lifestyle. So to me,
Absolutely.
poultry fits not only my personal interest and passion, but the lifestyle part fits
Yeah.
perfectly. So it's like a win-win for me. Really, I know this is what I'm meant to do.
Oh, that's great. And a kind of a good segue, I think, as we now let's talk a little bit about your current position and what you do, and yeah, we'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm a technical service manager. But previously at DSM, still, I was an
Hmm.
intern uh,
Yeah,
under an umbrella. DSM is a really big company, and
sure.
there's a branch called VRX. And they look at blood biomarkers in chickens. I was hired as an intern, really to post or do necropsies, and the
Hmm.
idea was to correlate those vet observations to the blood biomarkers in the bird. Uh, because I guess just as a refresher to anyone listening, so
Hmm.
biomarkers, it's just a biological indicator of your body's internal condition. We can measure things like cholesterol, blood sugar,
Oh,
different
yes.
hormones. Those are all
Hmm.
biomarkers. And
Yeah.
historically, this has been used in vet med. You can use blood work every year when you bring your dog or cat to the vet. Let's do the annual blood work, right?
Yeah.
And it is used to assess underlying conditions you can't necessarily perceive. Um,
Right.
things like hydration status, infection, anemia, nutritional deficiencies, things like that, and just
Hmm.
screening for metabolic disorders that you can't see otherwise.
Right.
And this isn't used so much in poultry, and getting the opportunity to work on this kind of project was really enticing considering I just finished vet school. We take a lot of clinical pathology to understand how do blood
Yes.
biomarkers move, and understanding
Hmm.
that in companion animal, because typically that's what it's been used for. So yeah, I got hired on as an intern to necropsy and post birds and look at blood biomarkers. So really, really fascinating stuff. And I'm now full time as a technical service manager,
Oh, good.
still working with the service and posting a lot of birds
Hmm.
and making correlations and connecting things and figuring out how do we make a place in the industry for blood biomarkers, something that's
Right.
pretty new. It's a different technology that I don't think the industry exactly knows what to do with. So it's part of my
Hmm.
job is to figure out how do we make a place for that and how do we understand that. And it's not easy, but it's the future.
Yeah. I wonder what do you think has maybe held us back in embracing that in the industry. I've kind of wondered. When you mentioned, some of the things we track in humans, and I'm all too familiar with those for sure. Um, but sometimes these are things we're watching over periods of just years and years. Is it because the life cycle of our broilers and turkeys, and really even layers, is so much shorter that it really hasn't become a thing to watch the biomarkers as much? Or what do you think has kind of prevented that from developing to this point?
Yeah, I think that could be part of it. just the lifespan in general, right? It's would be a little more difficult to really pinpoint the specific blood biomarkers, just considering they're not as long lived as we are. There's not studies that have gone on for years and years to develop this data. So that's a challenge for sure. But I think a lot of it is like the logistical challenge of bird blood in general. Chickens, like birds, they have nucleated red blood cells. They clot very quickly. It can be a little difficult measuring blood biomarkers in birds in general. So our service includes, we have handheld blood devices to go farm to farm. But some of this equipment can be costly. There are limitations. Blood, you have to be careful and conscious of your operating practices there.
Sure.
To not influence the blood results. I think it could be price, and also there's some data on blood biomarkers in general in birds and in chickens, but tying that exactly to disease challenge, there's less of that. So I think that's also another hurdle of even the education piece of understanding these blood biomarkers. We take a lot of classes on clinical pathology. There's a residency for clinical pathology after vet school to even further understand blood biomarkers. Same thing in med school. So it's complex. It's not a black and white diagnosis, really. So I think, combined with the logistics of sampling and chicken blood and just that the resources of not entirely understanding it kind of has held the industry back in that way.
Right. Well, we could probably do an entire series of podcasts on things that we used to think were not possible that we do routinely now.
Exactly.
So I'm sure it's exciting to be kind of on the front end of this and looking into the future thinking, it's pretty exciting where this can go.
And there's so many applications, commercially, just broilers, layers, turkeys, breeders. There's also a trial research application too of validating certain trials. Both helps veterinarians and nutritionists, farm managers. So to me, it's there's such a blood biomarkers are so broad and there's so many applications that there is a little bit for everyone in the industry.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Now, are there any specific kinds of areas in particular you'd like to address with those? Or I'm wondering, especially you mentioned nutritionists, and I think so much now about the gut and how important. I mean, we always knew it was important, but just thinking about the microbiome and everything we can tell and learn from that. I don't know if there's anything in that realm or any other specifics you might want to talk about with biomarkers.
Yeah. So like I said before, blood biomarkers are so broad. There are so many. And looking from like a practical standpoint in poultry, in chickens, it's we go farm to farm, and it's you want to be able to get results in real time. So that's another aspect of blood work in general. Having to send off samples, pull blood, spin it down, ship it off. You get results weeks later. At this point, the problem's gone. So that's another logistical hurdle. So what we don't do that. We don't send off blood. We have portable blood analyzers. So we can bring them farm to farm and get results within 10 minutes, 3 to 12 minutes of sampling.
Right.
So we limit the blood biomarkers we look at based on that, so that we can get really quick turnaround time. So I like to look at blood biomarkers. They fit in certain buckets to me. They're like nutritional biomarkers, calcium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, chloride, uric acid, total proteins. And then you have those more immune or disease-oriented blood biomarkers. You have carotenoids, AST, uric acid, again, total proteins. You have albumin, globulin, that ratio, glucose. And there's some overlap here, of course. But in general, there's, I'll kind of look at it as two different buckets of biomarkers. So, those are the main ones that we look at. And we can just get into like a few examples of how I can see this fitting in really in this like commercial setting.
Right.
I guess as a veterinarian, I think the total proteins is fascinating. That the albumins and the globulins. So we know albumin is the most abundant protein in plasma, found in both animals, plants, helps with osmotic pressure, transport of substances throughout the body, and it's made by the liver. So in healthy individuals, 60 to 70% of the total protein value you get should be albumin. So low albumin, even in small animal as well, this applies to other species, it's associated with malnutrition or possibly liver problems.
Oh, right.
So yeah, you get total protein, you get the albumin, and then globulin value. That globulins are split into multiple fractions, really. You have different, albumin is more homogeneous, but globulins are split into different fractions, really. You have, alpha, beta, gamma globulins, and those are also made by the liver, but more of those help fight infection. So, yeah, if you look at those two buckets and then that ratio of also gives you some indication of that immune status of the bird. So ideally, you want a higher albumin and you want a lower globulin. Because if you have higher globulins would mean that you're having some sort of active immune challenge, right? So yeah, looking into that, and we've tested birds and we see imbalances in this albumin to globulin ratio. And it gives you an idea of when are those birds experiencing some sort of challenge, because when we sample multiple ages, and we can get an idea of when are those birds reacting to something before we could even visually see it, right? And I think that's important to point out that it's good to correlate the blood biomarkers along with necropsy data. So posting sessions, pretty commonplace in broilers. And it only can tell you so much. It's only what you can visually see in the bird. So like having that extra level of a little deeper understanding into what's actually happening there. It can also validate what you're already seeing. It can help you, give you some insight into, oh gosh, these birds are now then partitioning, energy into making these albumins to fight infection. And again, that takes away from lean gain, takes away from feed conversion, which are all things that we care deeply about in broilers. So
now I have kind of an off the wall question. And because this is something I think about so much, I teach an advanced composition course. So I think about AI a lot because, trying to stay at least even with the students. I've given up being a step ahead of them, but at least stay even. But do you foresee any potential role because of the complexity with biomarkers? I'm wondering if there will be a role for AI in helping assess that complex mix that you might be able to see. Even if you're measuring a small number of them, I feel like it could still get pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Great that you touched on the artificial intelligence piece, because there are people on our team at dsm-firmenich that are much more focused and a lot brighter than me when it comes to data analytics, right? Yeah. That's something vet school doesn't really prepare you for, at least not me. It's a different skill set. And I admire our data analysts. They are brilliant, and using the power of artificial intelligence to come up with these models that can then correlate, right? If we have a positive vet condition, pathology we see on a posting, picking out those blood biomarkers that are directly correlated to that specific pathology, and then creating a model, right? Then that's what they've worked on too. So in the future, the idea is maybe we don't have to post or necropsy birds as often during a routine posting session. What if we just go in, pull blood on some birds, and then look at that and see what kind of challenges, what are they facing that is subclinical or even clinical, depending on the situation. So who knows the application in the future of where we could go, because some of those models are really spot on.
Yeah, it's amazing. It boggles the mind. And I'm certainly no expert in that area either, which is I wish I were for that class I teach. But
it's complicated. And I think even the next level is correlating both blood biomarkers with specific performance metrics.
Right.
to see we have this really high performing flock. What do those biomarkers look like in those really great high performing birds? And what do they look like when those birds are challenged or
Mhm.
not converting their feed like they should be? It's like
Right.
the application of that in and of itself is, I
Oh
mean,
my
endless
goodness.
there. So
Yeah,
it quickly gets really complicated and it's,
it does.
yeah, very innovative. But yeah, I think it's the future.
That's right. And this is how careers are made.
Hmm.
You start to see these emerging things, and this will, um, this is really the future. I mean, I think it's pretty exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things to think about, and both AI, avian influenza, and AI, artificial intelligence, move
Yep.
so quickly that it can be hard to keep up, but that's part of the job.
Hmm. Yeah,
The job.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, we've been visiting for a bit, and I want to be mindful of your time, and so this is a time when I'd like to ask if there's anything else that you would like to share before we get to our final three questions. Anything you'd like to share with the listeners? Well, it can be anything else professional or any questions that we haven't covered that you think would be a good thing to include.
I guess one final note.
Yeah.
There's one other, I think, really important application of blood biomarkers in
Oh,
poultry.
good. Hmm.
I think of coccidiosis, especially
Yes.
from a vet perspective. Coccidiosis, it's really common. We're looking at how do the blood biomarkers move in response to coccidiosis infection, which is what a
Right.
lot of people deal with. So we actually did a trial, and there are some already research on this topic.
Hmm.
Uh, but we look at the plasma carotenoids. That's one of the biomarkers that we look at. And I'm sure you know carotenoids, it maintains an effective intestinal barrier
Hmm.
function and can reduce bacterial and toxin translocation. It's a good indicator for that physical integrity of the gut. So there was a cocci trial done, and we saw a significant drop in carotenoids as early as 8 days prior to clinical signs. So it
Oh
was
my
one
goodness.
day after the challenge, right? 8 days before they were clinical for it, we saw this sharp drop in carotenoids. So that's just another application, or something to think about in terms of what can these biomarkers potentially
Yes.
show us, and how do we use that? And
Right.
the application of that, figuring that out is interesting.
Oh, very good. And I do actually want to go back to one thing that you said a minute ago, and I didn't want to gloss over this because I think it's a great point. Um, we are so used to asking the question why when things aren't going right or when we suspect that there's a problem. But when you talked about looking at high performing flocks, uh, how how instructive could it be to also ask the question why? Why are they doing so well?
Mhm.
What can we see that helps us get a better understanding of that we can then apply to other situations? Yeah, that's a great point, I think.
Yeah, it gives just a deeper understanding of our goal: keep them healthy, keep them
Yeah,
performing, right? So it's
yeah.
just another, I think, tool in the toolbox that's pretty underutilized.
Well, very good. Well, this has been great. I've enjoyed visiting with you and hearing more about biomarkers. It's yet another area outside of my area of expertise, but one that's so interesting, and
Yep.
and I'm going to be very excited to watch that over the coming years to see all the new things that emerge from that we haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah,
So
exactly. I think
yeah,
the possibilities are endless, and
all right,
I appreciate the time
yeah,
and
yeah.
allowing me to talk about these things.
It's time for our famous three. Your partner in improving animal performance, Berg and Schmidt. They believe the following additives are necessary in the poultry dietary: functional lipids for an efficient dietary energy management, phospholipids for emulsification achieving a better nutrient intake, MCTs to provide energy and modulate the microflora within the intestines and enzymes for elevated use of fibrous materials and byproducts.
Well, we have three questions we like to ask all of our guests. And so, first thing we like to hear about, because people share just some great ideas about this, but do you have a favorite poultry related resource, a book, just that kind of go to that has become very important for you?
My go-to poultry resource is definitely the Avian Disease Manual.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, to me that has been like the chicken Bible. Uh,
Yes.
Really nice pictures, easy to reference, easy to find
Mhm.
things. Pretty much everything laid out in this book. I had a copy of that in vet school, and it has served
Mhm.
me very well. I love to just refer to it and keep it in my backpack no matter where I go on any trip,
Oh, you
just to
bet.
refer to. I think it is a great, great resource. Very
Yeah.
practical. It's pretty concise. You don't get too
Yes.
bogged down in the details,
Right.
and yeah,
Right.
it's a good read.
Yep. There's lots of other resources for when you need to pursue things at a deeper level. But yeah, that's for practicality. That's a fantastic one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, how about if we take the poultry restriction off? Do you have a favorite kind of non-poultry resource or book? And this can be it could be professional, but it could definitely be just for fun or something that you enjoy.
I've always tell my friends this: if I didn't go to vet school and practice poultry medicine,
Mhm.
I would 100% be a botanist. I love plants. That's always
Yeah.
been my plan B in case vet school
Mhm.
didn't work out. Uh,
Yeah.
love plants. I collect a bunch of house plants since I was a child.
Wow.
Some of my favorite resources, which may sound odd, Facebook groups for plants.
Oh, sure.
Oddly, it has some of the best, most practical information. I like to
Yeah.
collect a lot of rare and unusual species that you really can't
Mhm.
find much in the literature or even online.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Those Facebook groups, you have these specialists who've grown these plants across the world, giving
Mhm.
their practical knowledge of how to grow these specific uh, plants that have these specific conditions to
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
And that has oddly been such a great resource, and probably
Mhm.
one of the few reasons I like to use Facebook is for these plant
Sure.
groups.
Yeah. Well, how I love hearing and how wonderful it is to hear those kinds of stories with social media, which
Mhm.
shows just the tremendous positive potential instead of, some of the negative things we think about sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. And you can connect with people from just about anywhere.
Yes.
Just amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, the last question then is just for someone who wants to get into the poultry industry, um, and I think even if we want to specialize in poultry veterinary medicine, what advice would you have? You've already given some great advice and talked about that, but anything else you'd like to say to people who may have those aspirations?
I think networking is one of the most important tools to
Oh,
getting there.
sure.
I think there's so many people in poultry who are so knowledgeable and
Mhm.
who are so willing to share that information. And I think
Uh,
there's so many things that you can't necessarily read in a book, especially in vet med. It's a
yep.
lot more than just reading, it's sight, sound, smell.
Yes.
So utilizing the people around you to help you understand and grow in that way is, I think, crucial to make it in this industry. Having that kind of mentorship and guidance through this industry is really
Mhm.
helpful, just considering how much expertise is out there.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
think networking and taking advantage of the conferences, and there are so many poultry conferences, and all the research, definitely don't underutilize those opportunities.
That's great advice. We think about the poultry industry, or maybe even it's just the number of birds. We think, oh, it's enormous. There's so many. But the poultry community is not that large. And I'm
Exactly.
sure when you think about the poultry veterinary community, it's probably pretty tight knit. I imagine you can get to know a lot of the folks that are in it in a pretty short period of time if you take advantage of opportunities to network.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much to teach. And I feel like a sponge. I just love to talk to people and learn as much as I can. That's why I appreciated all of my externships throughout vet school. That's really
Absolutely.
prepared me even more so than the actual coursework.
Well, and I'm sure you've already experienced this when you talk to young people. There's not many things more exciting than as a professional when you can talk to somebody coming into the industry, coming into the profession, who has that intellectual curiosity and who has that just eagerness and openness to learn. That's
Exactly.
a wonderful feeling. So no matter which side of that equation you're on, that's a great dynamic to experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, Dr. Montana Oubre, we have enjoyed our time chatting with you. We thank you so much for your willingness to share your journey, your story, and in this emerging expertise in poultry biomarkers, which we're going to keep our eye on for the future. Many exciting things there.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I always love getting a chance to talk about it.
Absolutely. And thanks to everyone out there for listening. We hope you join us next time for the next installment of the Poultry Podcast. But until then, we wish everybody a wonderful day and a wonderful fall. Thank you, everyone.